There are some times that there has to be that firm boundary of expulsion. Sometimes there is just no other option, depending on circumstances, on what has happened, who all is impacted. Because it may be that it's just the student themselves that's impacted. It may be that that student has brought others in. And so each circumstance is going to be very different. But in all circumstances, we can have compassion and we can have kindness.
Welcome to the BJU Press Teacher Edition podcast, where Christian educators are encouraged and inspired as we bring you interviews, practical ideas, strategies, and answer your questions about teaching in today's culture. And here's your host, Jenny Copeland.
Welcome back. It's great to have you back with us for part 2 with Peyton Snyder and our discussion about the prevalence of drugs and alcohol in our society, but also its impact or potential impact on Christian schools and our families. If you haven't visited our website, let me encourage you to visit teachereditionpodcast.com to learn more. Don't forget to go follow us on social media and share these shows out. Our heart is to reach as many Christian educators as we can, and we can do that with your help. Okay, so in part 1, Peyton Snyder talked about misconceptions about these substances and the importance of even Christian educators being aware of them and their impact on both students and their families. So we're bringing this closer to home in the Christian school, and that was just when our time ran out. So I want to pick back up there. Peyton, thanks for being with us again.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so in part 1, we talked about, like I mentioned, those misconceptions about these substances and their impact in Christian schools. So I want to follow down that path a little further. In most Christian schools, drug and alcohol use would result in suspension or expulsion, whatever you call it, at their school, and understandably so. We get that. But what else can we do? How can a school continue to support and to help in a situation when that arises? What would you say?
Sure. And that can be a very tough decision. And I can speak from personal experience on that. Having had a family member that was in a small Christian school in another state, and that exact kind of circumstance, and it was very, very difficult because the administrator knew our family very well and was trying to figure out what in the world do we do. And that was back in the 1990s that was going on, and so it really was even a little more not taboo to talk about it, but just kind of not as much awareness around it and everything like that. So that can be difficult. So people who experience substance use, like we've said, it can become a very isolating struggle that they have. There's a lot of shame associated with it, a lot of guilt associated with it, and especially if they're in any sort of a religious or specifically Christian background, the sin of that, and so builds, and like I said, the shame and the guilt and the hiding from that. So you might have a couple different circumstances that happen with that. Is you may find out that one of your students has done this. You may have a parent that is worried that their student might be engaged in this, and they come to you as the school administrator and say, I think there might be something wrong with Jimmy. Don't kick him out. We're struggling with this at home. He needs to stay in this setting because that's the only thing keeping him safe. And so that is a very, very difficult question. Couple of things that are so important with that is we want to be of help as best we can. As best we can, we need to help this family because we want those families or that student to be able to come and talk to us, to tell us what they're struggling with, so that we can be of help with them. So the language that we use with them when they come and talk to us is going to be very important because we can be kind, we can be compassionate, we can be loving with our words, but we can also be judgmental, we can be shaming, we can be dismissive with the words that we use. So it's very, very important that how we respond in this circumstance is what can really pull a person to us and allow us to help them, or it can push them away. And so the Christian community, we can provide such a beautiful environment, such a beautiful environment. We know what forgiveness is. We know what restoration to our good Father. We know what restoration is to the Lord. And so when we have the ability to allow for forgiveness, to allow for restoration on these human relationships as well, it's so important. It's so important. It is living out what has been spiritually done for us, living that out in the physical realm. So, but there are some times that there has to be that firm boundary of expulsion. There sometimes has to be that firm boundary with suspension and different things like that. Sometimes there is just no other option, depending on circumstances, on what has happened, and different things like that, who all is impacted. Because it may be that it's just the student themselves that's impacted. It may be that that student has brought others in on that. And so each circumstance is going to be very different. But in all circumstances, we can have compassion and we can have kindness. And so something else that's really important as a part of this, in the event that you do have to dismiss a student from school, don't allow that family to become abandoned, because that mom and dad are going to share a tremendous amount of shame in that. They are going to feel guilt in that, whether or not someone says if they had disciplined him when he was younger, he would have never done that. They're going to feel that, and they're going to think that even if nothing is ever verbalized or any sort of judgment passed on to them, they will still feel that. So it's important for you to be able to offer, as an administrator, to be able to offer your time to listen to them. If they come to you and say, hey, I think this might be going on, give them that time and listen to them. Intentionally pray with that family. The powerful prayer of a friend, of a confidant, of a trusted individual that would say prayers over our children. As a mom, I pray over my children, but when I hear someone else pray over my child, it knits me to that
Sure.
person in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
to know that they would have a heart for my child as well, that they would want the soul of my child to be
Sure.
for all eternity with the Father, those sorts of things. So as best you can, also offer them help within the community. So if you know that they're a part of a local church that is well equipped to handle that, encourage them to connect with their pastor,
Sure.
or say, can I call your pastor? Be a united front with that family, so that mom and dad don't feel like they're alone. Knowing the resources in your community, or if you have someone on staff. So say in the event that you say, okay, I think this is just going to be suspension rather than expulsion, we're going to be able to keep Jimmy in our school after a short time frame. If you have knowledgeable staff that can counsel that young person, allow them to do that. Because I think most school administrators would say that there are times that our students would be much more open with a staff member than they might be with their own mother or father, depending on what's going on. And I will say too, there are family members, there's parents that would say, you guys handle them. I got nothing for them. If they're going to be sneaky in my home, if they're going to be sinful in my home, I've got nothing for them. And you can try and fix them, but I'm going to wash my hands of them. Or you may have a situation where you have a split family, and you may have one parent that absolutely is going to come from a biblical approach and a loving and kind approach. And you may have a family member that doesn't even care that their kid is in a Christian school and is going to have a very contrary, very secular view of the circumstance, and say, well, that's just what kids do What'd you think was going to happen, and that sort of thing. So you want to, knowing your families and who's in your school, help point them in the right direction for what kind of counseling would be best for them. Again, whether it's their church, it might not be. Some families, they go to a church that has wonderful preaching and wonderful singing and nothing in the way of additional counsel outside of a Sunday morning. So being aware of what kind of church they go to and how you can support them, but really truly continuing to talk with them, to love with them, to know that they are not on their own in all of this, is going to be a huge support for them. And again, in them not feeling so heavy in that shame and in that guilt.
Right. Okay, so let's back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
If an administrator or a teacher, let's say they hear about this in their school or from some students, in your experience, where's a good place to start with that? So we already kind of talked about the end, but let's back up and grab a few pointers for the beginning of this.
Sure. Well, number one, find out if it's actually happening.
No, true.
Yes. Yeah, truly find out if it's actually happening. So, because there's always chatter about different things, and somebody may be bragging about something that never even happened. But usually where there's some smoke, there's a flame somewhere in the mix, so there's something. I would say in this too, it's so important to have a compassionate and loving approach. And so there's most students, I still can name the one. I had two folks at my school. One was a teacher, she was a female, and one was my basketball coach. If I was going to spill my guts on anything, it was going to be one of those two persons. I trusted them. They were my favorites as a student. I trusted them. And so if anything would have been awry at my school and they would have thought I had info, I'm sure the school would have sent one of those two people to me and been like, hey, what gives? What's happening? What's going on? And so here's a couple of things that we got to remember. So let them know that you want them to be safe. You are asking this question not out of to get someone in trouble, not as a gotcha, not as a, boy, when we get our hands on them, we're going to throttle them kind of a thing, but more of a, hey, can you talk to me? I've heard that there might be some shenanigans going on at Jimmy's house when he has kids over. Do you know if they're safe when they're there? Do you know if there's anything that you think might be bothersome or upsetting? If other kids' moms and dads know about it. So all in how you ask the question, and not just first thing you sit them down and say, people drinking at Jimmy's house. You have to be wise in how, so you have to be wise in how you ask them. And again, understanding too, remember that social connection piece I was talking about earlier?
Yes.
Nobody wants to be the snitch. Right. You can talk to somebody else. You're not going to talk to me about it. And I will say, I was personally in a circumstance when I was in high school and I had gone to a party and my folks were out of town and I was supposed to spend the night at my friend's house that night. And there were shenanigans going on. And I was like, I need to not be here because I think this is going to be a problem next week. So I got in my car and I drove home. And again, my parents were out of town with their family members, with their brothers. So all the grown-ups were gone and I was 17 and my parents came home and I said, hey, I just want to let you know I didn't stay the night at my friend's house. Why didn't you stay the night? I said, there's just stuff going on. I thought it was better. I just come on home. And my parents, two things, they were mad that I drove that late at night down in a major city by myself as a 17-year-old girl.
It was for a good cause.
Yeah, exactly. And then they were glad. Right, sure, that they felt like I had made the better decision. Yeah. So next week came along and Tuesday morning, all the chatter had happened Monday about where everybody was. Tuesday morning, one of the two people that I just said earlier came and got me out of the classroom and said, hey, did you stay the night over at so-and-so's house? I said, I did not stay the night at so-and-so's house, right? I was not going to be the snitch. And they said, okay, were you supposed to stay the night at your friend's house?
You saw this coming.
Right. And I said, yes, I was. And so they said, can you tell us why you left? I said, I just thought it was best that I not be there. And they said, can you tell us what was going on? I said, just stuff that I didn't think was best. I didn't think it was appropriate. So I was saying yes to them, but not chapter and versing every single thing that I saw or every single person's name that was there. I just said, hey, if you've heard chatter, maybe talk to those folks. You know, they had a long,
like we just said.
Yeah, they had a long enough list of other people's names. But the thing was, I didn't want to lie to the person asking me the question, but I really did not want to be seen as a tattletale.
Yeah, that's
and
hard.
as a snitch at 17 years old. I still wanted to be able to have my social connections, even though those social connections were making really bad decisions on Friday night.
It's a lot of pressure.
I still didn't want to be painted in a certain light by them.
Right.
So there are times that we can ask questions and not necessarily have all the exact facts, but we know I need to go and talk to this other person specifically and things like that. And so I would say, and the thing that helped me was the person was so kind. And they said, look, if you knew you shouldn't be there, other kids probably shouldn't be there either, right?
Yeah, that says it all right there.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so that protection and stuff. And here's the other thing too, make it commonplace and encourage folks that if they need to bring a friend along, man, there's power in numbers when I'm sitting there. Because if anybody had been sitting next to me and said, well, Peyton, you and I both left. We both knew there was stuff that wasn't supposed to be going on, right? Sometimes that positive power of a friend sitting next to you. Social
connection going the other direction.
Yeah, exactly. And if I were to come to one of those teachers and say, hey, I think there's stuff going on at Jimmy's house and a couple other kids know about it too, and we're worried, right? If I can bring a friend with me, that's important too. So when two kids come in and they say, hey, we've got something we're concerned about over there, be willing to listen to those kids. They want to know they can be trusted, that what they're telling you is going to help keep their friends safe, because that's the other important thing too, is that we make sure that as adults, that when we say, can you please tell me this? Because the loving thing to do is to keep your friends safe. And I can't promise that your friend is not going to get in trouble, but I can promise we're going to do what we can to keep them safe. Because not saying something and then something really awful and catastrophic happening is way heavier burden to carry. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we wrap up for today, Peyton, do you have any practical resources that you could share that would just be a good source of general information? Just something you could give us as we go. We'll put these in the show notes as well, but something for general information and prevention as Christian educators face. I mean, this is a growing influence in this culture around us. So what can we do? What are some resources you have?
Yeah. So there's three in specifics that specifically that I think would be great. And so one is the website, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and I'll send the specific link to you guys. It's just a little 4-minute video that talks about what alcohol and drugs do to the physical body. And so that we can be educated on how these things are physically destructive to our human body. And there's a little bit in there too about how it impacts our brain and can impact our emotional health. So that's one of them. Another one is going to be compassionatewisdomworks.org. And so there's a specific article on equipping church leaders on how they can interact with their congregation. So the same holds true for whether it being a clergy with a congregation or whether it being a school administrator with their school. Now, not every article is going to line up chapter and verse with every person's belief system, but take the good, leave the things that don't line up, and be educated on that in how you can best approach some of your folks, because we're going to end up with those unexpected conversations with families that are in our school. And then the last one is going to be on the website for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They shortened it, thankfully, to the acronym, and it's going to be SAMHSA. So SAMHSA.gov. And then there's some additional things on that. And so they have a list of core competencies, is what they call it. Core competencies for clergy and other pastoral ministers in addressing alcohol and drug dependence. And so it's very practical. And some of them you'll look at and you'll say, yeah, I already knew that. And some of them it's like, oh, actually I might need to get a short list together on that. And then I would say the last thing too, it's so important for us to know what our local community resources are. So knowing what those community resources are in your own town, in your own community, even across your specific state. Because what churches specialize in addiction counseling and recovery groups? So there's multiple churches here in our county that have a different version of, there's Alcoholics Anonymous, so there's AA, but there's multiple churches. There's five specifically that I know of that have a biblically focused version of AA, is what it is. And remember that community connection I was talking about, that social connection? This is something that will help as well. So you've got that one-on-one counseling that a person can receive, but then also, hey, other people that love the Lord like I do and that believe Scripture like I do, they also struggled with this like I did. And having a good connection and community to that, and that piece that might be missing, that they can say, I was just driving down the road and I don't know why, but I thought it'd be a great idea to do something really dumb. And the other person can say, hey, that's all right, man. Let's go talk about it without the shame and the judgment that's there. Something else that's important to know for your community resources is, what are your medical helps? So does your hospital assist in detoxing people, or is there a place like where I work at the Phoenix Center that can medically detox a person? So that physical help that might be the immediate need. And then lastly, what I just kind of touched on, the local community groups for the additional support beyond that one-on-one counseling. So whether it's Celebrate Recovery, which has a scriptural focus, AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, there's so many different organizations and groups that are able to help. And then, like I mentioned at the top of the podcast, the local groups that offer long-term care, like maybe Miracle Hill or Renewal.
Right. Yes, great ministries.
Yeah, different things like that are wonderful community resources, because there's lots of things that I know about substance abuse. And to quote my dad, he says, if I have a substance abuse question, I'm going to ask you because you're the expert in that. He said, if you have a real estate question, you ask me because I'm the expert in that. So being aware of what we know,
right,
and being aware of what we don't know. Yeah. And intentionally educating ourselves, knowing good resources, knowing biblical resources, knowing appropriate secular resources that would line up with our moral values, because there's a lot of opportunities for solutions that people may have that they would say, hey, this is the best way to approach it, but it may not line up with our biblical or moral values.
And so important.
Yeah. So lining that up for yourself, for your family, for your particular school, those sorts of things are really important to look at doing too.
Excellent. Super helpful. Peyton, thank you so much for those. And thank you for all the great information that you shared with us today. It's not a pleasant topic and one you would hope you wouldn't or won't need in Christian schools, but unfortunately, it is the world we live in. It's all around us, and these pressures, these are what our students are facing. And if not in their school, in their neighborhood, or elsewhere, these are topics that are impacting even the families we serve and support. So I know what you have shared today has been so helpful to our listeners. Thank you so much for your time with us today.
Yeah, absolutely, Jenny. Thank you for having me again. I appreciate it.
And listeners, thank you for joining us as well. I hope you were informed and challenged as we work every day to speak into the lives of our students together as we navigate this world from a biblical worldview. Remember to go to teachereditionpodcast.com to learn more about the show and to submit questions for our upcoming episodes. Of course, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and go follow us on social media. Now it's time to get back to your day, but once again, every day in the classroom is your day to impact and inspire through God's power and through His grace working in you. Now go do what God has called you to do.